Thank you very much for joining us at our Long COVID and Physical Activity Learn and Share event. My name is Will Slemmings. I'm the Strategic Lead for Health at the Heart Sports and Physical Activity Partnership, and it's my absolute pleasure to be introducing today's webinar to you. It's great to see so many people joining us today, which I think is a huge testament to the importance of the topic. But I did want to also point out we're fully aware this is a sensitive topic, and new knowledge is developing all the time, which is why we thought it was important to put on an event like this to highlight not only the potential good that physical activity can do for those living with long COVID, but also the complexities involved. So before we get into it, some quick webinar housekeeping. So we're using the Zoom webinar function today. So all participants will remain muted and cameras off. Your best viewing experience is to the speaker view. So you can do that on the top right. You can see there's a little image on the screen there. Please do, I see lots of people are using the chat already. Please, you do use that for comments and networking through the chat function. If you have a specific question for one of the presenters, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. I'll keep typing this in the chat to you throughout the event, but please do put the name of the presenter because we've got lots of people with us today. The webinar is being recorded and will be distributed to everyone registered to the event, so you can catch up on anything if you miss anything as we go. And lastly, there will be a pop-up feedback survey when you leave the event today. So please do fill that in because that helps us to guide through our future efforts and future events and future physical activity and long COVID work as things develop through the project. So as you can see, we've got a really packed agenda today. We're going to be kicking off with Dr. Harsha Master and Abby Minter from the Long COVID, who are talking around long COVID and physical activity from the Hertfordshire Community NHS Trust. We're then going to have Laura Roberts, who's joining us from Nuffield Health to talk about a project that they run at the Hertford Nuffield Health in Hertfordshire. They're going to hear a personal story from someone that has lived with long COVID and has used physical activity to aid his recovery. We then thought it was important to learn a little bit about the rehabilitation pathways that exist in Hertfordshire, and there's a slight complexity because we've got two different NHS services across Hertfordshire, so they do deliver slightly different pathways, so we wanted to bring that to attention and how you can engage with that. And then finally, we're going to be talking about a long COVID and physical activity rehabilitation project that we're running at the Heart Sports and Physical Activity Partnership, which is what's funding all of this work here today. Anyway, without any further ado, you're not here to listen to me, so I'm going to move this slide on. In fact, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to invite our first speaker to I think Abby's going to share her slides and Harsha is going to tell us about long COVID and physical activity.
Thanks so much, Will. Hi everyone, and nice to not see you because I can't actually see anyone, but I'm so glad that so many of you attending today. So my name is Dr. Master and I'm a GP by background. And I was asked to set up what we called a COVID rehab service, and this was way back in August 2020. So we actually started this in May 2020, and it went live in August 2020. So we were one of the very first clinics to be set up, and I provide a lot of the medical input into this pathway. So I'm going to talk today about what I have learned through this journey about long COVID, what I'm seeing, and how we're sort of managing that in clinics. So next slide, please. So just to give you a really brief definition of long COVID. So this is the NICE guidelines that came out a while ago. And essentially acute COVID is anything that's less than 4 weeks within those 4 weeks of their acute illness. Ongoing symptomatic is between those 4 and 12 weeks. And then if they are having persisting symptoms over greater than 12 weeks, that is now classified as post-COVID-19 syndrome. But as I said, lots of patients do refer to this as long COVID. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to talk around about some of the symptoms that we see. And you can see from this slide, it is so many. You know, when I first started this, I thought it was just going to be breathlessness, a bit of fatigue, you know, just a few. But actually, many patients actually come in with at least 10 different symptoms. And these are some of the most common. So you can see things like neurological symptoms, things like headaches. Often they complain of dizziness or pins and needles or pain. Lot of brain fog where they feel their thoughts are really muddled, and it is literally that they feel like they can't really think straight. They struggle with words, they struggle with memory, and definitely a lot of sleep issues as well since COVID. Ear, nose and throat symptoms, lots and lots of people presenting with voice changes, so hoarseness of voice, particularly in the first and second strain. I'm not seeing so much of it now, but in that first and second wave, lots and lots of people with persistent sore throat, intermittent hoarseness of voice, smell and taste issues, and sort of nasal congestion. And interestingly, the tight throat that they described, people used to call it a COVID strangle. I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but it's a very common term with patients with long COVID. Respiratory, we know breathlessness, cough, tightness, and then heart symptoms. We did actually do an audit of some of the symptoms that we were seeing most commonly, and interestingly, chest pain and chest tightness came up as one of the third symptoms. It was fatigue, breathlessness and chest pain. So really, really, really common symptom that we are seeing post-COVID, as well as that kind of fast heart rate and palpitations. We now know there seems to be an autonomic element to long COVID, where patients can present again with this fast heart rate, dizziness, problems with their temperature. It's not really related to their cardiovascular system. So we think it's more to do with the autonomic nervous system. And I will talk a bit about that in a minute. And then lots of gastrointestinal symptoms, new food intolerances, tummy ache, nausea, diarrhea, reflux, bloating, and that was definitely after the second wave. I saw a lot more gastrointestinal symptoms. And then obviously your fatigue, and this is not just fatigue. This is not, I'm just tired. This is, I am so tired, I can barely lift up my limbs, I can't get out of bed. In the first wave, there were quite a lot of, healthcare professionals that got it in particular, who could barely look after their children, couldn't make dinner, like severe fatigue. And some of them have had like an ongoing low-grade fever. And definitely one of the other symptoms is this sort of change in periods and change in hormones in women. So those are some of the sort of common symptoms that I see. Next slide, please. Now, interestingly, when I noted this really early, so I was the one that was sort of seeing a lot of these patients, and I documented this, and there were lots of sort of really unusual features that I ended up reporting. So one of them was that lots of patients were quite fit and well before they got COVID. So we were expecting a cohort that had lots of medical issues, because that's what was happening in hospital. Those patients going to hospital that were very acutely unwell, ending up in ITU. Many of them were older, and many of them had lots and lots of other issues like cardiac problems or respiratory problems. But that isn't what we were seeing in our clinics from, the ones coming in from the community. And actually, I just want to add there that the majority of the referrals we set this up actually as a post-ITU pathway for those patients that had gone to ITU, were very unwell with COVID and needed rehabilitation. Actually, what we found, over 90% of our referrals come in from general practice. And these are people that got what we call a milder illness in the community, that didn't really go to hospital, didn't really get any treatment, but they just didn't recover. So that's the vast cohort that I am seeing at the minute. So many of them were quite fit and well beforehand. Lots of them did have a long initial illness in that, when they first got COVID, they weren't just ill for a day or two, they were really ill for a week or two, couldn't get out of bed, multiple symptoms, sore throat, headache, diarrhea, loss of taste and smell, so multiple symptoms. And one of the most interesting things that I noted with this was that their symptoms seemed to undergo this remitting, relapsing pattern. So the symptoms would come and then go, and then come and go. And again, it was something I wasn't really expecting to see. Another big feature was this post-exertional malaise, and I talked about that before. Not just I'm tired, this after anything. So they could climb the stairs and they'd have to go back to bed, or they would try and go out and pick up their children from school, and then they'd have to end up and come back and have a 2-hour nap. And these are people that were previously maybe running marathons, or triathletes, or doing regular gym work 3 times a week, who just really were struggling to function. And the other thing that we definitely noted is this overlap with this autonomic dysfunction and POTS. So POTS stands for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And it's something that was present before, there was some literature about it, but it wasn't very well recognized. I think it is important that you are aware of it. And essentially what happens is patients will describe their heart rate going up on very minimal activity or just on standing. And often they'll come back and say, oh, my Apple Watch, I saw it on my Apple Watch and I can see it. They can see the figures, and every time I stand or every time I move, my heart rate's going up, not proportionately to what it should do for the amount of activity that I'm doing. And this is a condition that's really kind of gaining momentum. And what we think is that COVID is affecting the autonomic nervous system. Now, your autonomic nervous system is what controls your involuntary processes. So things like your breathing, your heart rate, your digestion. And we think that COVID is inappropriately activating this. Almost the way I describe it to patients is where it's activating their fight or flight response, but it's not really coming down. It's activating it, and you go into this high state of, high heart rate, high respiratory rate. And then normally when the threat has gone, everything goes back to normal and, your heart rate comes down. But with COVID, what we find is they almost stay in this permanent state of fight or flight. Their heart rate goes up, it stays up, it tends to go up disproportionately, and it really can affect activity, it can affect exercise, it can affect return to work. So it's just important to be aware of it. Another illness that it seems to be that there seems to be some overlap with is this mast cell activation syndrome. And again, one of the other theories around COVID is that it causes some sort of immune dysfunction, but not in a way that we can really measure through standard blood tests. And possibly what it's doing is activating mast cells to release histamine. And actually a low level of histamine can cause things like food intolerances, fatigue, brain fog, etc. And they are doing a study in UCL where they're trying all patients on antihistamines, and they found some good responses with this. We know that long COVID exists in the elderly and children as well, but it can be really challenging to identify, particularly in elderly populations. Next slide, please. So in terms of recovery, are we seeing recovery? Yes, we are seeing recovery, but it's really, really, really slow. And as the slide says, many patients can remain symptomatic for up to 2 years or longer after their initial infection. And interestingly, we are still getting patients now that had it in March 2020 who are still coming through. So you can see definitely in that first and second wave, people were really, really unwell with it, and recovery is very slow. However, what we have found from our pathway is that a multidisciplinary, holistic approach that is tailored to that individual, involving medical assessment, investigations, treatment, and rehabilitation, is actually what is essential in facilitating a faster recovery. In the beginning, there were lots of models that just focused on rehab, and patients didn't really get better. There were other pathways in secondary care that just focused on medical assessment, and just that without any rehab didn't work either. So it's that combination of medical assessment and rehabilitation that really, really works the best. And again, from doing this from quite a few years now, what we have found, there definitely seem to be barriers to recovery to long COVID. So one of them tends to be stress and anxiety, sleep disruption, overexertion, and that it's very different in different people. So for some people, it may be that they're, if they were a triathlete before and they're desperately trying to go back to that and they end up doing a 10K run, that can trigger a relapse of their symptoms. But for others, it can just be, trying to do a bit of housework, and that is just too much, and it triggers all their symptoms to come back. Overworking. So when I say that, a lot of people are desperate to go back to work, so they try and go back and they try and do it too quickly. And what we have realized is that standard phase return that we were using before doesn't really work. It needs a much longer time, almost like a few hours at a time, and then you increase it week by week. That really helps the most, but I'll let Abby speak a bit about that. And there is some new emerging evidence that poor gut health is also linked to poorer outcomes in COVID and recovery. And there is a study going on at the minute where they're giving everybody prebiotics or probiotics to see whether that can really improve recovery, and particularly with ongoing gastro symptoms. Next slide, please. So some of the management, this is just a really brief overview of some of the things that we are using, in terms of like recovery. Now, when we first started this, we were very much like, you've got to push through, and we did that for patients who had pneumonia or had flu and things in the past. It was very much like push through and you'll get better. But that doesn't really work with this. If they try and do too much too soon, they get a relapse of their symptoms and they crash and everything comes back and they feel dreadful. And it's really, really important to understand that. So actually a lot of our advice is around lifestyle advice. So it's about resting their way to recovery, trying to identify what is causing you stress. How can you minimize that? Sleep is absolutely massive. If they are not sleeping, they are going to be fatigued. They are going to have brain fog. Their mood is going to be low. So if that's a big factor, that's something we really do try to address at the beginning, and we talk about things like sleep hygiene, a regular routine before bed, not using any screens. And for some people, we do think about suggesting things like magnesium supplements or melatonin, just to, if they're really, really struggling, because it is such a big factor. Healthy diet, cutting out alcohol. Now, alcohol, interestingly, has got high histamine in it. So if they have got sort of overlap with that mast cell activation, sometimes people have come back and said, oh, if I have alcohol, it really makes my symptoms worse. So we tell them to cut that out. And also what you're trying to do is avoid those sort of peaks and troughs. So things like cutting out caffeine and sugar that can really help. And again, there is some evidence that eating a more plant-based diet, cutting out processed foods, what that essentially does is reduce inflammation to the gut and to the body. And so it decreases stress on the body and it does allow for that recovery. Pacing and managing expectations. So Abby, again, will talk a bit about this in a bit, but, very much about slowing it all down, doing something, scheduling in a rest. And what essentially we're trying to do is advise, building stamina up slowly. That's the most important key, I think. We have found that anything that calms you down, that reduces stress, that might calm down your autonomic nervous system and calm down that sort of fight or flight feeling that so many patients do describe, can really help. So things like meditation, mindfulness, yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi, all of these things, acupuncture, some people have found helpful. But to be clear, these are not evidence-based. This is just what we have found helps. We do need to do more studies on this, but generally these are all lifestyle measures that can help with health and recovery. So I think are really important. And in terms of work, if we do suggest a flexible, patient-centered, tailored return to work. And these are some links which you can use, like Your COVID Recovery. Patients can be signposted to, and our website, which has a really fantastic booklet that we give out to all patients. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand over to Abby now.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Harsha. So I'm Abby Minter. I'm the occupational therapist that works as part of the COVID-19 assessment and rehab service. So I'm just going to talk you through a little bit about who are the people that we have been seeing and those people that we've perhaps supported back to physical activity and work and generally sort of getting back on track with their lives. So interestingly, it's one of those situations where as an occupational therapist, I've worked with lots of different age groups, but this is different in terms of most of my patients are working age. So that isn't something that I'd necessarily come across in such high quantities before. And we're very active before COVID, had, work, busy families, whether or not it be younger children or perhaps had older parents that they were helping to care for and do tasks for, keeping home themselves, having a social life, engaging in hobbies, and also doing, some exercise activities as well. And I'll probably just think about there's sort of three different categories that I would think about in terms of how active my patients are. So I have those that are functionally active. So, they do the weekly shopping, they do sort of, jobs around the house, DIY, gardening, housework, and they're fairly active, but they may not be engaging in anything more formal in terms of activity, whether or not it be, mindfulness, yoga, or going to the gym. Also, the leisurely active individuals, they may enjoy walking with family and friends at weekends. They may go out on a bike ride or go swimming with other people for leisure. So not necessarily putting in a great deal of effort, but still takes up quite a lot of energy. And also I've got my patients that do regularly engage in high intensity activity. So whether or not that's classes, going to the gym, they're perhaps, training for triathlons or marathons. They've regularly done, 10K runs, perhaps do combat or, fit classes 5 times a week before work, and even playing sports at weekends. So one thing I do ask my patients is what's their goal and what do they want to achieve by having treatment sessions with me. And returning to physical activity is probably one of the most common goals that is reported. So every time I see a new patient, which is, every day, then pretty much most of the time they want to get back to doing something within that category, usually more on the leisurely or the high intensity phase. So to actually help them get to that point, then we go through a bit of a process, which, as Harsh has alluded to, then recovery is slow. So this does take time. And my role is to assist with managing, helping them to manage the symptoms of long COVID in their everyday life and to reduce the impact they have on their everyday lives. So this may be, the reasons that they're referred to me. Mild to moderate reduced energy levels is usually the category of patients that I see. They might report having brain fog, where they're finding it really difficult to either concentrate, follow conversations at work or at home, memories affected, word finding difficulty is really, really common. And so thinking about going back to work with all of those symptoms can be really challenging for somebody. So it's lessening the impact that has when they are wanting to either go back to work or socialise is what we sort of focus on initially. So we go through a process of assessment and then agree goals and work with them to think about prioritising, planning and pacing their everyday activities, which is not just if they want to go back to work or they're thinking about they want to go back to, doing some sort of physical activity again, but everything that they need to do within their day. And the whole idea of this is to reduce the effect of the boom and bust cycle, which, when we're talking about energy levels and fatigue management, it really helps for patients to be able to understand it in this context, because they may feel like they're able to go out and sort of, maybe go for a walk on a sunny day and think, okay, this is okay. I'm walking, I'm feeling all right. I'm going to go a little bit further. I can manage another half an hour. So they do push themselves. And then what happens afterwards is that they feel worse. And that then has a knock-on effect of that evening. They may start to feel more tired, and that their fatigue symptoms, which can be physical, sort of muscle aches and pains, joint aches, headaches, the brain fog symptoms, that all starts to come on. And then that may then last for a couple of days, so that then they end up doing less. They rest for a few more days after that because they know that they feel unwell. They start to feel better. And then the cycle goes back round again. So the pushing themselves and doing too much definitely is something that I have a lot of conversations with my patients about, and so does Harsha as a GP. So what we're trying to do is promote in balance to their day and week. So you want to make sure that they really understand where those energy levels, what activities they're doing, and also what actually takes up energy. Taking into account all of those activities that I've just mentioned in a daily and weekly cycle, and using activity diaries to help visualize with that. So really getting somebody to focus on what are they doing every day and how much energy does that require, and what is their fatigue like? How does their energy feel? With some things, is there a bit of a pattern? Do they feel that a late afternoon, do they find it really hard to concentrate and keep going? Or does that happen at various other times of the day? So it's trying to work out patterns for them to help then put strategies in place to be able to combat that. We encourage consistency of energy levels, so you're not going through this boom and bust cycle constantly. A lot of the patients that I talk to is they feel that by the time they go to bed, they're absolutely exhausted. So they feel that actually they should sleep really well. And in actual fact, they don't. They then have a real sort of disturbed sleep. They get up in the morning and don't feel refreshed. And then this cycle carries on all over again. So it's actually talking about patients about their sleep, which is kind of one of the lifestyle factors, but also balancing it in terms of their energy, that you still need energy to actually go off to sleep properly. And for a lot of people, they find that once they've gone through that process of actually weighing out their activities, thinking about their levels and doing an activity diary, they find that their sleep tends to improve as well. We talk about rest, relaxation, leisure activities, so things that they might just find fun, like phoning a friend and having a laugh with them, or listening to some music that they really enjoy. It doesn't have to be high level energy, but it's things that's going to make them feel good. And formal rest and relaxation is also really important. A lot of patients say that they don't feel that they deserve that because they already sort of interpret that they're not doing enough in the day to warrant giving themselves that time. So some of it is about acceptance and expectations. It's accepting where they are at the current time, and that the only way that they're going to get better is really paying attention to what their body's telling them. So diet is also something that we talk about an awful lot. And I often feel like a real sort of like the Grim Reaper, almost telling them, okay, well, to cut this out and to reduce this is having really good effects on some of our patients, as Harsh has already mentioned, some of those food groups. So not drinking alcohol, cutting out caffeine, thinking about processed foods. It often feels like it's a real dampener on the conversation. But a lot of our patients then understand that it's about accepting that this is recovery, and this doesn't mean it's forever, but it's really good for health and well-being generally. So this is a constant message about activity versus energy. So it's really getting into people's head, working out, what energy do I need for that activity? What is that activity? Do I understand it? Do I understand that that's not just taking up my physical energy, but it's actually my mental energy and my emotional energy as well? So it may be that you're going out and, want to do a run or want to get back to physical fitness, but you used to go out and run half an hour, no problem, or even more than that. But actually thinking about it now, then doing 5 minutes may be all the energy that you have. Or it may be talking to a friend who's having some emotional difficulties at the moment and usually has your support. That is another activity, and it's interpreting that is going to take from your energy a bank. So the process is to really stack up those pebbles so that you know that it's firm, that it's not going to wobble, and that you've got a really good balance to your day and understand where your energy comes from. So I frequently hear, if I push myself a little more, then I'm sure I would feel better. Or I'm not doing anywhere near what I used to do before, so I don't want to stop exercising and this will make me feel worse. So some of my patients that I see are going out and they are doing exercise classes or swimming or cycling and doing a fair amount and feeling quite fatigued, quite low energy generally. And it's trying to work through with that individual to really accept that may be exacerbating their fatigue levels. So one patient that I have had that highlights this very nicely was a chap that had quite a high level, quite a high stressed job, was working full time, had a young family, previously ran 3 times a week and then would go out for a long cycle on weekends, or 30 miles plus, and really enjoyed that time because that helped with his stress levels at work. When we first went through his activities, he was running twice a week and doing a mile each time. So for him, that was a drastic change, only 2 miles a week of runs. And he felt like he didn't want to give that up. So we worked on other parts of his day. Now, interestingly, then what happened was we had snow and ice and everything else, and he didn't feel very well. So he didn't run for a few weeks. And what he noticed was that he had more energy and he started to feel clearer. He had brain fog when he was at work, and each afternoon he would feel that he'd need to sleep, and sometimes he would, about 2 or 3 o'clock he'd fall asleep. So what we then worked out was actually those 2 small runs were exerting him quite a lot. So by cutting them out for the time being and getting that balance right, it actually really helped with his recovery. And that's the point. For effective recovery and management of symptoms, it is the opposite. So it's balancing the energy, doing less, getting the improvement first, and then building that up is then what helps with the progress. And then when it's appropriate for low to moderate fatigue levels, then, you know, a slow, gradual return, maintaining that energy for a bit longer is really important. So the benefits, we all know generally what the benefits are for anybody, you know, undertaking physical activity. But for those that's had long COVID, then some of it might be the fact that they're deconditioned, that they haven't done anything for quite some time. So some of their joint pains are becoming a problem, and they might have put on some weight. For their mental health, it's that feeling that they're getting better, you know, releasing endorphins, improving their mood really helps. It can help with their sleep to improve quality and encouraging a healthy routine. It can help to improve levels and feelings of tiredness as well, with, you know, the less you do, the less you want to do. So pushing it gently is good, but actually going too mad is where we're trying to really avoid that boom and bust cycle. And with brain fog symptoms, it can help to reduce effects and give people more of a clarity, you know, of thought, and help to focus a bit more. So some of the challenges for the future that, you know, when I talk to individuals about that next step, they're feeling better, they've kind of been on an even keel for a while, is that some people are really anxious or worried that symptoms can return and that will feel worse again. And it's that understanding that this is a relapsing, remitting condition. So working with them to actually focus on that and think it will happen again, your symptoms probably will come back, but how do you deal with that? Most people, if they've understood that process and their capabilities and what's achievable, then they're okay, and they'll feel that anxiety they can work through. And it's a normal feeling as well. So a lot of reassurance about that. Why would you want to put yourself back to that point where you were before? You don't want to burst that bubble. And that's how they, you know, often feel. More of a challenge is the temptation to push yourself and then do a little bit more because they're enjoying it and they're starting to feel better. And this is probably something that, again, they will do. They will enter into that boom and bust cycle at some point. But what we talk about is that that's a learning curve. And it's then to remind them that they do need to keep pacing themselves. They do need to keep planning what they're doing in the week, prioritizing it, and keep a bit of a diary so that they can reflect back and see what it was that perhaps pushed them too far across the edge. The whole point is about balance. So that's one key thing to take away from today, is about really people listening to themselves to be able to balance that energy and really work with that in the future. Thanks. Back to you, Will.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, both Harsha and Abby. Really, really interesting stuff, and loads to take away. That's the exact reason we want to have you along to events like this, because it's such a specialist topic, and there are so many complexities. And from a physical activity point of view, it really does challenge that traditional, potentially outdated approach of push yourself harder, push through the pain, kind of no pain, no gain, that sort of ethos. And what's clear is that that's the complete wrong attitude, especially in this context. There is one quick question I wanted that's come through on the Q&A. It might be quite a big question, but I'll let you answer that. It's come from Nicola, and she's asked, how many of your patients have a full recovery, i.e. back to full-time work and full return to their previous life? Is that something you can answer?
That's tricky, isn't it? I mean, I think one of the biggest things I will say is, like, you know, it's all about managing expectations. When patients come into our pathway, we are very clear, like, we may not cure you, we may not ever get you back to how you were before, because for some of those patients, particularly in the first wave that came through, you know, after the April 2020, who were very, very poorly, it's been really slow and really tough. But if we can get them feeling better, you know, that is a win. And if we can give them the tools and the resources to be able to manage this themselves, I think that is what is key. It's sort of giving the onus back to them. You can control it. You can work out what are my triggers, what is causing a relapse of my symptoms. Is it because I did too much? And then you can manage that, and that gives, you know, that can give a lot of control back to patients who feel like they've lost that control. So I don't have exact numbers for you, but in terms of full recovery, honestly, I don't know. We discharge once they are better than what they were when they came in. When they were back at work. We definitely have had, you know, in the first year, we had lots of NHS professionals, didn't we? And we did definitely have some that had to change their roles, you know, who couldn't do those regular night shifts and 12-hour days and walking, you know, they just couldn't do it. So they had to change to more of a different role, or a home role or admin role, and then they can gradually go back. So I don't know the figures. I would say in terms of discharges, we've discharged quite a few, haven't we? 30 to 40% have been discharged. I would say most of them are better in some way, but I'm not going to say that they were necessarily fully back to how they were before, because that's not what our aim. It's just to get them more aware of their illness, give them resources of how to manage it, and, you know, symptomatically treat them and make sure we're not missing anything else.
Brilliant.
Would you
Thank
agree, Abby?
Yeah, definitely. It's about that acceptance process and that thinking, actually, what is my, you know, what's my job? You know, have that support available for, you know, all of my patients, but some of them have had to adapt what they're doing and have had to change, or their workplace has been very flexible. So there's been a different role sort of within what they were doing before. But in terms of going back and getting back into work and managing hours, then that is something that a lot of our patients do achieve. But it is about that takes time, and you have to build it up gradually.
Brilliant. Thank you. We've had some really good questions actually coming in the Q&A now. Only issues on wary of time, we've got loads to fit in. So perhaps Harsha or Abby, if I could ask you, if you click the Q&A button at the bottom, you can maybe type some brief answers, and then if we've got time at the end, we'll come back to all the questions and answer them live. So thank you very much. Really, really useful. And we're going to hear a bit more from you later as well. So I'm just going to reshare my screen. I need to do it with some. Okay, that's that. So moving on with the agenda, up next, we're really happy to have Laura Roberts join us, who, as I mentioned earlier, is from Nuffield Health. We've heard a lot about that, the theory, I think, and the clinical side of things. So we're going to hear a little bit about putting physical activity into practice with long COVID from Laura. So Laura, it's over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Will. Hi, everybody. My name is Laura. I've been in the health and wellness industry for about 10 years now, and I've been running this course just over 2 years. And I was nodding my head the whole way through Harsha and Abby's talk, because I go through the similar sort of things that they go through, and a lot of symptoms that we've learned over the time. And it was very basic to start with, and now the list has got a lot longer. I have found from my own experience that women seem to be affected more than men, but it's not that men aren't affected. It just seems to be there's a majority more women coming on my course. So that's quite an interesting little fact that I found throughout the time that I've been doing this. I do a little analogy for my patients to class it as a battery life. So you might have been a Duracell before, Ultra Energy, and now you're now becoming like a Tesco value battery. So it's working on different battery lives, and that's going similar to what they were talking about with pacing and things like that. So that's one of the things we really focus on during our course. So as Nuffield Health, we are a charity, which a lot of people don't know about, and this is one of our charitable causes putting out back to the public. So I do a 12-week program for long COVID, and within those 12 weeks, the first 6 weeks we do is all virtual. So it's all done via Teams. I do a weekly group call with the group. So I have participants, up to 12 participants per group, and we go through an exercise regime in that hour. Also get to know each other a little bit as well, because it can feel quite lonely with long COVID, and meeting people that are feeling the same is really nice, just to be able to chat about it and show each other's experiences and find out that you're not alone. We also then do like a group workout. This starts off very basic, so it could just be like from sit to stand, and then we progress onto harder things as the week goes on, and obviously if we're seeing progress with the patients. We also I do a one-to-one online with the patients, and within this one-to-one I go through emotional well-being, which, like Abby and Harsha said, it's a very big topic when you're coming to long COVID, because it can be very daunting, and a lot of the times people do feel that feeling of not being able to move forward. I wasn't running the same, I wasn't doing the same things, I can't play with my children, things like that. And it makes a massive difference when you start seeing those changes. which we have seen changes. People are getting better. Yes, it might not always happen in those 12 weeks, but if they're carrying on the practices, you do see a massive change in how they're feeling. Once we've done the first 6 weeks, on week 7, you actually get the opportunity to come into club on a weekly call. So instead of the weekly call, you come into club. And this is really nice because I get to introduce you to the gym environment. You can practice. We have a swimming pool here as well. So if that's something you're interested as well, I introduce you how to use a swimming pool. And it's just a nice way, again, building that community, which I feel we've lost quite a lot of that, especially we've been in all the lockdowns and everything, and bringing that community back is really, really nice. And I know lots of past participants are still really good friends, and they meet up and join classes together. And it's really, really nice to see that they're going through that journey together and to not feel alone again. So within the last 6 weeks, you get 6 months worth of membership with Nuffield Health Hertford, and also you get access to all our classes. I do specific classes, I call them wellbeing classes, which I run twice a week, that you're obviously welcome to come to, and I base that on around quite a lot of my long COVID patients still go to this class, and other people with other injuries and things like that. So we do run these sort of things alongside as well. Within the one-to-ones as well, I talk a lot about sleep, nutrition. So same again, gut health has been a major one that has been a big game changer, and looking at more like Mediterranean diets has helped really to bring the inflammation down, and a lot of patients have taken things like antihistamines and things like that to try and help with their long COVID symptoms. I also recommend like doing brain games. So quite a lot of the brain fog, memory lacking can really be hard when you're going into work environments, remembering, oh, did I send that email, or did I call that person? And just doing little brain games. I've done it where you can get the kids involved as well if you've got children, and I found that's quite nice to play memory games with your children, and it's just a nice way to find an alternative so that you can work on all the aspects of the brain fog. We also focus on similar sort of thing of boost your mood. So we get you to do activities that you really love. So it could be simple, like us girls get our nails done or something like that. And it just really, really helps. We're trying to push forward in coming back into the community again, seeing friends. And I do suggest to limit time sometimes. So it could be, if you know you're going to go see a friend, it could be you're limiting it to half an hour, and then you have to step away and say, I need to go now. And then that's when you get time to re-energize and refill that battery life back up again. So yeah, that's our program in a nutshell, really. I'm just trying to think if I've covered everything. But yeah, open to any questions if anyone has any questions.
There were a couple in the chat, largely around the screening of the patient. So could you tell us a little bit more about the kind of when they arrive with you and how they're initially screened?
Yes, of course. So we have a triage physio. This isn't done through me. This is so to apply for the course, basically. Let's start right at the beginning. To apply for the course, you'd go on the Nuffield Health website, long COVID, and it will have a breakdown of some of the symptoms are, or not symptoms, but the age requirement is you have to be over 18. I think one of them is don't have any heart conditions. Once you've filled that in, they get sent to our triage, and one of our physios will do a couple of communication conversations with you, what your symptoms are, and they will do a sit to stand test. This is just to see if it's the right level for you, and then that you're healthy enough to be able to come on. I still have quite a lot of patients that are on it, but they still struggle with day-to-day life. So it won't be someone that's just come out of hospital. We won't be dealing with that sort of level. It's like that mid sort of level that we're looking at. And then once that comes through and you've passed triage, you then get put through to me. And then I get in contact with you ready for when the next 12-week program is. And then we get you on as soon as we can for the next one. So for example, my next one is on the 26th of June.
Brilliant, thank you. There are a few questions and more coming in the Q&A, but again, we're already behind schedule. So could I ask you perhaps to do the same thing, Laura,
Yeah.
and type some answers? I know you've got to leave us a little bit earlier, but any that you can do. And if we can't get round to anyone in the Q&A, I'll make sure I catch up with Laura and we get some answers over to people sort of following the event. So thank you very much, Laura. Really useful and really nice to put a practical context on it. And like I say, yeah, if anyone's got any further questions, please keep putting them in the Q&A. Brilliant, thank you. And we're going to take that context setting a little bit further now. Now, I really hope this is going to work. I'm going to put a bit of a caveat to this, that we tested. We've got a video. Unfortunately, our personal story from Philip. He's unable to attend live with us today, but I was lucky enough to catch up with him earlier this week, so we've done a little recording. We tested the recording before, so it should work. If it's a little bit laggy, please do bear with it. It should sort of sort itself out as we go. If it completely doesn't work, I'll be sending these links out to everyone, so you'll be able to catch up properly with it afterwards, but hopefully it works. I think before we go into it, it's important to note that Phil's experience will be very different to other people's. We've already covered that things are completely different for different people, and symptoms will affect people differently. You'll hear that he was very active before his COVID journey. He's actually engaged with both Abby and Laura in his journey, which he'll reflect on in the video as well, which is nice given the journey of the webinar. It's also very important, I think, to point out that all of the views that David gives are of course his own and not necessarily replicable across kind of other patients and other professionals involved. Also, I want to point out, once we finish the recording, I mentioned to David that Laura from Nuffield was attending the event, and he made me promise to extend his thanks to Laura, as well as everyone else that he's thanked in the video, because he attributes a significant part of his progress to attending her class. So I really hope this is going to work. Please let us know if you can't hear it, but if it's a bit laggy, stick with it. Hi, everyone. We're really happy today to have Phil Gibson with us, who is someone who has lived experience from going through long COVID and some involved experience with physical activity in his pathway to recovery. So thank you very much, Philip, for being here with us today. You happy for me to just crack on with some questions for you?
Absolutely. Hopefully I can help.
Brilliant. Okay, so to start with, can you just tell us about when you first developed symptoms of COVID-19 and how it affected your day-to-day life?
Yeah, it was December 2021, and right at the end, my 5-year-old daughter at the time developed COVID. I pretended I had it too, so that she had somebody to kind of cuddle up to. But it took another 3 weeks for me to actually get it. And it was at the time where we were all stuck indoors. If somebody in your family had it, you had to self-isolate. But at the time, a few days later, after my daughter got it, my dad was rushed into hospital, and he had a stomach aneurysm and was given a few hours to live, had a 7-hour operation. So there was a big trauma happening in my life at the same time. And my mum couldn't drive, so it was really stressful. So it was a very stressful time. But I was ill for a couple of days, and that was it really. So it didn't massively affect me.
Okay, and so how or when did you start noticing that you were eliciting symptoms of long COVID?
So literally a week before I tested positive, I tested every single day for I think about 2.5 weeks. And a week before I tested positive, I started feeling dizzy. I remember walking through the garden and feeling very dizzy. And then I'd be on a call at the time to my clients, and I would shovel 2 cups of coffee down to try and get my brain working, and it just didn't happen. I had a standing desk and I felt more and more dizzy. And then I started kind of developing purple toes and sore joints, heart palpitations, and I went through it. There was a massive long list of things that happened. Like I went kind of blind in one eye and deaf in one ear, high blood pressure, short fuse, I had lack of concentration, heightened emotions, and insomnia. And my wife says that I stopped laughing at her jokes, which
may or may not have been involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh wow! And so you were quite active before your experiences with COVID. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I use kind of Ironman training programs or triathlon training programs to keep myself kind of real, and enables me to cope with day-to-day life and to be ready for my family when I'm needed. And it enables all my stress to kind of be taken away. And that was something at the very beginning I didn't have. Of having long COVID, I didn't have chronic fatigue. That came later on. So I tried to train at the very beginning, which is possibly the worst thing you can do with long COVID. And eventually, after a few months, I started getting chronic fatigue, and I wasn't able to exercise anymore after that.
So it sounds like you were using exercise quite heavily pre-COVID, as lots of people do in terms of kind of life stresses and coping mechanisms and that sort of thing. So how did it feel to no longer be able to do that?
It was really hard at first, and then through my doctors, I was introduced to Abby Minter, and she was incredible. Without her, I wouldn't have been able to get through this. But I remember her saying, "There's a chance, Phil, that you won't get better," and it's a really hard thing to hear, because up until that point, the rhetoric I'd heard was people saying, "Oh, and then this one weekend I woke up and I was better," and that's what you constantly long for when you've got long COVID. Every you think it's going to happen next month, it's going to happen in a week's time, and it made me stop and reevaluate my life as somebody with long COVID, rather than that person who was active beforehand and doing triathlons and endurance sport. And it was really, really important to hear.
Right. So it was Abby Minter, who's of course part of the Eastern North Arts COVID Rehabilitation Service.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit about how your journey to being involved in that service and what it involved?
Yeah. So first of all, I went to my GP, and then Abby contacted me and said, "Look, let's have a chat," and eventually it was like a process where I guess she evaluated where I was at and what I needed, and that's what she was able to do. I believe that she had weekly meetings or monthly meetings with specialists, and they would all discuss different cases, and she was able to get the information quickly that I needed in those meetings and relay them back to me. And it enabled me, and I think this is really important, to have a diary. And it was my well-being, so my emotional state, my physical state, and my mental state. And I gave myself a percentage, and I collected that kind of data for about 4 months. And it enabled me to see and pinpoint what I was doing in my life that improved. But it also gave me hope, because I could see that steady incremental improvement. And I think that's the word with long COVID. It's incremental, and that's really hard thing to accept, I think.
Absolutely. And in the short time we've been working on this, especially with the physical activity side of things, that's what's really coming out. It's the slow progress. Don't push yourself. It's the worst thing that you could do. So could you tell us a bit about how you were able to reintroduce exercise into your life through everything you've been through?
Yeah, it actually started with Abby suggesting I did the Couch to 5K, but I also went on a Nuffield Health program, but that didn't happen until I was ready. And I think there was a point with long COVID where I knew I wasn't better, but I was improving certain parts of like my scores, my physical, emotional scores, and my physical scores were going up. So I felt ready mentally. I was ready for it. And at that point, I did the Couch to 5K, just started actually no, a little bit before the Couch to 5K, I started the Nuffield Health program, which is a 12-week program, and it enables you to talk to other people on a virtual kind of forum once a week, other people that have long COVID, and you do a little bit of exercise to start off with, people with different levels of long COVID as well. So that was really important, that slow progression, and also to be able to comfort each other on this call as well. So that the mental side of this was really important, that there were other people involved.
That's brilliant. That's what I was just going to ask, if whether the sort of group approach was beneficial, sort of people in similar situations.
That was everything, the best part of the program, because I guess if you're on your own, you're still comparing yourself to something fictional. You think you're just that one person that can't stand up and make breakfast for your family, or and all I wanted was to take my kids to the park again. That's all I wanted. I didn't care if I did another triathlon again in my life. That was my goal.
So in terms of physical activity, were there any specific activities that you thought helped better, or you would advise against, or how did you find with that?
Yeah, just again, it's the incremental. It started with a test for it's a seated. You stand up lots of times from your chair to see how many times you can do it in a row for 30 seconds. Squats. There were lots of squats and lots of groans from people in the virtual room. Then they gave you a book. I've got it here. I've got like a rehab journal. Don't know if that was back to front on.
That's fine.
But it gives you advice of exercises to do. So there's a variation of exercise from lots of different points of view. So not just aerobic, like anaerobic, stretching. So there's lots of different parts of like you would if putting together a package for somebody who's exercising for the very first time. You wouldn't just have one set of instructions for them. It would be lots of different types of exercise, I guess, and depending upon that person and their ability, you just have small repetitions of it, I guess, to start off with.
Well, I think that sort of half answers my next question, but I was going to ask if lots of people that we're going to be engaging with through this project are going to be the deliverers of physical activity that want to make their sessions more inclusive for people that have been through everything that you've been through. So would you have any advice for them as to how they should approach their sessions?
Yeah, absolutely. The group method, as I said before, was perfect. I'd say anxiety in everybody who has long COVID is massive. To go into a different situation, to actually leave the house is massive. Like to cross a road. Remember somebody described how it was for them crossing a road, and they said by the time they'd looked to the left and by the time they'd looked to the right, they had forgotten what had happened before. So it was kind of like if all the instructions are there for how, if it's a in-person event, if you can give them all the information you can without overloading, that's probably the biggest part, just getting the person there. And then if you're including them and they're sat down, and then there's hope, and that's the biggest thing. I think we're all individuals, and I have a different background to other people that I met in terms of ability, and maybe strength, and different things work for different people. I'd say actually after leaving that, and it's when you leave the program that you can only leave when you're ready. I guess leaving Abbey, and it was at that point where throughout my life, and now I've started training again, where I'm starting to wonder whether is it coming back again? Am I tired because I'm doing more and more exercise, or am I getting ill again? And that's the hardest bit. And you have to have faith that you are better, and that it is just your body adapting to exercise And I think that's important to put across to people. It's not just long COVID that makes you tired, but that incremental steps, you have to be sensible.
Absolutely. And you touched on it, and I think it would be fair to say you are at one end of the spectrum in terms of people's physical activity levels pre-COVID, sort of triathlons and different things like that. So there'll be lots of people facing different scenarios. But just so we can understand, where have you got to now? Where are you on your journey in terms of recovery and physical abilities?
Yeah, so I did that all back in January this 2023, and it's taken me 5 months. Very slowly every week I've worked out a program to be able to cope with week 1 of an Ironman program. I'm in week 2 at the moment, which is really hard, and but it's just amazing to be able to do exercise again at that level. I mean, I have a dad bod now, so I am no longer an athlete, but it's amazing to do it.
Brilliant. And it's so fantastic to hear a real life example of where someone's been able to use physical activity not only as the mechanism but also the motivator, I think, to get back to work, to how things were potentially before. So just to finish off, obviously you're on the journey still, you've got a long way to go, but do you have any advice for people that might be a bit further back on your journey and where they're going through? And
absolutely. I've done a list, and I hope you don't mind. I'm going to read off it. And it was I think one of the first things Abby said is to give yourself credit for how far you've come so far. Being British, it's really difficult to do that. It's really hard to congratulate yourself, but it's so important. Accept that it will take a long time and it may be a slow process. You may go backwards before coming forwards. Cut out sugar, caffeine and alcohol. They are massive kind of, I guess, the inflammation. And a lot of the people I have met that haven't got better yet, and I don't want to say it's because of this, still have the odd glass of wine, or they still have tea and coffee every day. But I did a diet for 3 months. I did a low histamine diet, and I think I was only supposed to be on it for 4 weeks. And I've seen my progression because I recorded every day my progression. That was huge. And I could see throughout my diet that my percentages got higher as I got better. So measuring your emotional, physical and mental well-being. Try to look at your life and stress sources. And if you can analyze that and take any of those stresses away, because most of the people I've met, and I kind of talked about it at the beginning, with my stress with my father going into hospital, pretty much most of the people had a huge life stress at the time that they contracted COVID-19. And there was something connecting all of them with this stress in their life. Get your family on board to understand medically what your limitations are at the time. Like if you have to sit down to get dressed and you can't make your kids breakfast anymore. Introduce mindfulness, and mindfulness to heal as well. And when your body and mind is ready, there's a kind of mental shift, and this is maybe when you're ready to be better, there's a mental shift to tell long COVID to kind of do one. And I think a lot of people hold on to long COVID, but I don't want to kind of put everybody in the same boat as that. But I think the most important one is give yourself credit for how far you've come.
That's fantastic, and some really, really great advice. I can't thank you enough for having come to talk to us today, Phil. Really useful. I'm sure there's lots of people that are watching this that have learned a lot or understood a bit more, and may even be in the same position as you or a bit earlier in that journey. So yeah, thank you so much, and we'll speak to you again at some point.
Thank you, and I really hope, I just want to say thank you to Abby again and the long COVID team. Without them, I would not have recovered this quickly.
Hi everyone. Okay, so apologies anyone that had to look at me twice during that. I wasn't actually able to turn my camera or mute button off because it stopped the video every time I tried to do it, so hopefully it wasn't too distracting. Obviously, Phil's not with us to answer any questions. I'll catch up with the chat and the Q&A during our next session because I wasn't able to click on those either. But we're going to move on back now to Dr. Harsha Master, who's going to tell us a bit about the Eastern North Hertfordshire COVID pathway. And I think I've got control of your slides, Harsha, so just tell me when you want them to move on.
Perfect. That was a fantastic video by Phil. So I think that really kind of reiterated a lot of the things that I'd been saying as well. And, you know, so yeah, it was fantastic to watch. So I just want to talk a bit about our pathway. So we cover East and North Herts only. Hertfordshire is sort of divided into 3 different sections, but going forward, it will all be, you know, eventually it will become one sort of what we call ICB, where they will merge. But for currently, we're just East and North Herts. And I thought I'd just talk a bit about our team. So our team, our core team, I would say, is our rehab coordinator, and she is a specialised occupational therapist. And essentially what her role is, and I will come on to in a minute, is you know, all those referrals that patients have to be referred in from their GP, and all the referrals get a triage. And she does a very, very detailed first assessment, normally done by telephone, and you know, they have to fill in a specific screening questionnaire called the Yorkshire Screening Tool, which documents all their symptoms and their occupation and all sorts of things, and we go through that, and then she will decide what else they need. And other members of the team include myself. I'm the COVID rehab GP, and you know, my role really is, you know, we talked a lot about those symptoms, you know, the chest pain, the chest tightness, the breathlessness, the headaches, and sometimes there is a clear explanation, and sometimes patients did have those pre-COVID, but for a lot of people they're new symptoms. So, you know, definitely in those earlier stages where we didn't know what that was, lots of those patients were being referred through to me. I would then do another further assessment of them, do a really detailed history, you know, check, you know, go through all their different symptoms, try and find out what's connected, it was really difficult, you know, with all these difficult symptoms, you know, trying to connect them all up together. What is the one I need to deal with first is very difficult. But essentially my role is to kind of investigate further. I can organise blood tests and, you know, further scans, and I'll talk about how I liaise also with secondary care, so I can get patients into hospital appointments and get reviewed that way. So I kind of almost medically hold that patient, and I try and sort of bring all their symptoms together to make sure we're not missing anything at all. We then have an occupational therapist, and that is Abby, who you've already heard from. We have a clinical psychologist, we have speech and language therapists. We are linked in with IAPT, which is the mental health service, and they come to our multidisciplinary meeting, which we hold every week. We also have dietitians as part of that, pulmonary rehabilitation, who are chest physios, and you know, they do a lot of work with breathing and breathing disorder, breathing dysfunction. And we also have the chronic fatigue service, who are known as Activate, and they are also part of our team, and we can refer to them, as well as physiotherapists. So every week we have a multidisciplinary meeting where all of us come together. It's virtual, and we, you know, as someone else said before, we discuss difficult patients, complex patients. You know, we try to work out the best route, what is the best team that they need, and then we try to make a plan for them and use that to go forward. So it's really, really, really helpful because, you know, I want to reiterate, this is an illness we still don't know a lot about. It doesn't really have a cure. We don't know what the long-term prognosis is. A lot of what we did when we first set this up was, you know, there was nothing, there was no evidence, there was no research, there were no guidelines, and we had to develop this pathway as we went along. So our pathway definitely has been developed according to patient need. You know, we sort of saw patients, you know, realized some of the problems they were having, and then adapted our pathway accordingly. And that's how our team has built up. And actually, it wouldn't work any other way. I talked about that medical input and rehabilitation, which is very important. So our overall aim is to provide coordinated, holistic care involving both medical assessment and rehabilitation. Next slide, please. So not all areas in the UK have access to long COVID clinics. I think in parts of Scotland, they still don't have any. So I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the things that some of our teams do within our long COVID service. So pulmonary rehab, you know, lots and lots of patients were coming in, still do come in with that ongoing breathlessness. And so they generally will get referred to me for a medical review, but while they're waiting, they also get referred to pulmonary rehab, and they get a group session, they get a group educational session, which looks at, talks about their breathing and sorts of things they can try. And if they don't improve with that, they can also get a face-to-face session. And if they still don't improve, they will liaise with me, and I can then liaise with secondary care and get them reviewed. So we've got really good pathways involved to sort of, try different things. And if things are not improving, we can then move them forwards. We have ENT, which is ear, nose and throat department. So I work with them at the Lister, and speech and language therapy for that sort of ongoing hoarseness, the voice and dysphonia. We work with dietitians. So again, it's very easy to recommend a low histamine diet, but patients, we need to make sure that they then don't become deficient in other minerals or, anything. So it's important to do it correctly. So if I am suggesting that, I will always refer them to a dietitian so that they can be given the correct advice and it doesn't cause any other problems for anything else. We have a clinical psychologist who deals, lots with cognitive issues and psychological issues, and that's been really, really helpful. And obviously, Abby has already talked about her role in terms of energy conservation, return to work, etc. Our chronic fatigue team, so they tend to deal with those patients that really don't get, better, have severe fatigue, really cannot get back to work, and actually when we first set this up, one of the ideas was, by sending them to them earlier, what we were trying to do was prevent that fatigue from becoming chronic. So, put those resources and give them that advice earlier to give patients the tools and the resources to be able to manage this themselves so it doesn't become a chronic condition. And that is, part of our aim. As I said, we have the mental health team, IAPT, who come to our MDT. They offer support with anxiety, depression, but lots of other things as well. And they run, there's lots of different things that they offer, and it's been really helpful for a lot of patients. I'm very much linked in with the respiratory team at the Lister. They run the COVID recovery service, which is run by 2 respiratory consultants. So if patients are not improving with that breathlessness or the cough, or they've got symptoms I'm not happy with, I will refer them there, and they can get CT scans, they can get lung function tests, they can get a review in clinic. And once we've ruled out, if things get ruled out and there's no medical cause, they will then come back to me, and then they can continue on their rehabilitation journey. And as I said, there's lots and lots of people that were presenting with this fast heart rate, palpitations, chest pain. So I do, and let's be, I just want to be very clear, if they do have chest pain and chest tightness which has not been investigated, or we don't know the cause, I do not advise them to do any exercise. And I will say you need to wait for that review first to make sure that we're not missing anything that's severe, and then we can think about exercise at a later date, and it has to be very, very mild. So I will always give them that medical advice first, get them seen by a cardiologist, and then I can pick up from there. And going back to the POTS, that sort of fast heart rate on exertion, lots of cardiologists don't really believe in it. It's quite a new thing that's really kind of come to light post-COVID. It was there before, but COVID has really kind of exacerbated, really brought to the forefront some of these symptoms. Many patients don't. And when we talk about this remitting, relapsing illness, symptoms coming and going, if they do too much, all of their symptoms get worse. This is very much with the POTS as well. So if they overdo it, they'll find that the palpitations are a bit worse. They'll find their fatigue is worse. They'll find their hoarseness, the voice is worse. So everything comes back. And all of those lifestyle measures are really important for managing that. And also, we're very much linked in with physiotherapy. Lots and lots of patients present with pain and joint pains, and some of it's through deconditioning, some of it's through poor posture, some of it was due to a really severe cough when they got COVID, but their input into our service is quite vital. Next slide, please. So just the criteria, for us, it's very much Eastern North Herts at the minute. So patients have to be registered with a GP that's in Eastern North Herts. They have to be adults over the age of 18, and they have to really have symptoms for more than 12 weeks as per the NICE guidance. Very early on, we didn't advocate that you had to have had a positive test. Lots of people didn't have a positive test, particularly healthcare workers, and there was a really high false rate negative, sorry, I'm not saying that correctly, lots of patients were negative when actually they were positive, so the false negative rate was quite high. So, you know, we did take patients as long as they had symptoms highly suggestive of COVID. And even now it's much more difficult because people are not testing. But as long as they've got that history or other people had COVID, then we will accept that patient. And the biggest thing I just want to say, the referral into us has to come from a GP or from a consultant in secondary care. Long COVID is essentially a diagnosis of exclusion. You know, it's very easy, I think, especially in that first wave, lots of people were very ill and everything was put down to long COVID, and there were other things that were missed. So when patients come into us, we are very, very clear that, you know, other things have to be considered and ruled out, things like cancer, things like other infections. You know, could it be something else? Is it that they've got a low iron level that, you know, is causing their fatigue? Because all of those things are correctable. So all of those things, we ask for that medical assessment to be done by their GP first. They have to have bloods, they have to have an X-ray, and then they come into us, because then most other things have been ruled out. Next slide, please. And I think this was just this was our rehab coordinator who put this together, just to kind of give you an idea of what happens. So when they come into our pathway, as I said, we use the Yorkshire Screening Questionnaire, and this is kind of like a 2 to 3 page survey, and it's got all of their information. So when they had COVID, what their current weight is, what their occupation is, what symptoms do they have, and they have to rate themselves on it. So it gives us a really good idea before they even come in of how they are, how unwell they are. Do we need to direct them back to their GP to see a cardiologist, for example? And then we have a rehab coordinator that then goes through that with the patient in a very long triage call, goes through all of their symptoms, you know, signpost them to the right place, and then she will decide what is this patient need. Do they need a medical review? Do they need to go and see mental health? Do they need to see a physiotherapist? And they can do some of those referrals. So yeah, that's just a bit about, and then, you know, they then get filtered through. And the other thing that we have realized is that trying to refer patients into multiple things at once, if we referred them to mental health, physio, occupational therapy, it doesn't work. A slow stream is what is needed. They almost need to do one thing at a time, and that is why recovery can be slow. Brilliant. So I will end there. Sorry, Will.
No, that's okay. I was having some internet issues there, so I've now ended up with 2 windows open. So I'm going to try and check that this works still. Harsha, can you just confirm that that's moved on your screen?
So I can see 2 screens of you, but as in, yeah, I can't see the slides. Right,
let me just quickly. Sorry about this, everyone.
And I just wanted to, while you're doing that, I thought I could just say, you know, just in terms of how many referrals have we had. So we cover East and North Herts. On average, we get about 50 referrals a month, 40 to 50. We had a huge spike after the second wave. I think altogether, Abby, we've had maybe over 2,000 referrals in, so quite a lot of referrals in. And predominantly, we're seeing women more than men, as Laura said as well, and definitely more common in the white population rather than other ethnic minorities. So I just thought I'd update you with that.
Brilliant. That's perfect. Thank you very much. I'm going to kick straight on because we're running out of time quickly. But as mentioned, so Dr. Harsha Master has given us a rundown there of the East and North Herts pathway. In Hertfordshire, we have 2 NHS trusts operating. So we also have our West Hertfordshire pathway. Now, unfortunately, David Murnane, who's the clinical lead for the long COVID service in the West Hertfordshire side, also couldn't be with us. But I'm going to play a quick video of him giving us a rundown of how things work on that side of the county. And I'm going to mute myself first.
And thanks for the introduction, Will. Pleasure to be here today. So I'm the clinical lead of the long COVID service here in West Hertfordshire on behalf of Central London Community Healthcare NHS Trust. And we're pleased to deliver the long COVID service to all patients across the West Hertfordshire locality, covering any area between St Albans, Harpenden, Watford and Three Rivers, the Coreham and Hertsmere, including sort of Boreham Wood, Elstree, that sort of area there. So in terms of our service, we're a fully functioning multidisciplinary team. So within our service, we have general practitioner, clinical psychologist, occupational therapists and physiotherapists, rehab assistants, speech and language therapists, and myself, I'm a clinical exercise physiologist by background. So it's a really high skill set level of team to deal with the complexity that is long COVID, which I'm sure you've heard earlier today. So in terms of the service provision, all referrals come into the service via general practitioner, and patients, much like with diagnosis of long COVID, have a series of investigations to give that formal diagnosis. From that point, we offer a rehabilitation program that consists of both conservative management and health factor risk management, and that's delivered by the whole multidisciplinary team. So what our sort of patient pathway might look like is, again, you have that initial referral from your general practitioner. We receive that referral, and one of our specialist nurses use that as a triage process and find out the best type of professional that might be best suited to manage your care from the first point of access. After that point, you'll have an initial screen with just getting an overview of yourself, your presentation, your symptoms, any past medical history that might impact your sort of rehabilitation. And at this point, there might be further discussion about signposting to other specialist services that we as an NHS trust have access to across West Hertfordshire. The programme itself is mainly a hands-off and virtual delivery programme. So we deliver an 8-week education programme covering topics such like diet and the management of your long COVID and health, fatigue management, breathlessness management, emotional health and well-being, psychological support and input, and answering all the do's and don'ts when it comes to the long-term management of your long COVID. There's a lot of alternative sort of reading out there you might find online, which has probably been discussed earlier today, but we use very much evidence-based practice to deliver our care to you within our pathway. That's an 8-week education. This hopes to cover the whole locality. We do understand it is a travel for some of our patients, but it just gives you access to see a person face to face, which I'm sure throughout this COVID time has been increasingly difficult. At this assessment, we might do a series of different investigations and observations of you, taking your height, weight, blood pressure, your heart rate, and a few simple clinical tests just to see and test the onset of your symptoms and any production of those symptoms that might be exacerbated through these tentative assessments. It's nothing to be worried about. It just allows us to tailor your treatment plan specific to you. Now, your treatment from that point, you'll have continual sort of clinical reviews with our clinical members team. Typically, you might see multi-professionals during your time within the service. So you might have fatigue management from the occupational therapist, while also receiving respiratory physiotherapy in terms of breathlessness management from our physiotherapist. That's quite a normal and typical thing. And you can see any professional that you present with the appropriate symptoms for. Now, alongside this, a new intervention that we're looking to sort of develop is our in-house physical activity and rehabilitation programme. Essentially, we offer it in 2 separate forms, or are looking to offer it in 2 separate forms. One is quite simply a return to fundamental activity. With all long COVID patients, one of the most significant impacts is fatigue, and that fatigue enters into a vicious cycle of deconditioning of your musculoskeletal tissue, but also withdrawing from social activity, whether that be work or whether that just be socializing in general. This first entry step is just to gain your confidence in a supportive and caring environment with specialists there to advise and support your continued recovery. Typically, this program lasts once a week for around 6 weeks. And then after that, there's a secondary program, which we deliver. It's more of a progressive program and based around cardiovascular and strength-based exercise training. This is an 8-week program, and following that, we're hopefully going to have you in more of a position that we're looking towards discharge and onwards referral to perhaps community-based services like Heart Sports Partnership might be offering, and also other specialist services, say you need management for your other health conditions at this time. The role of physical activity within long COVID rehabilitation is really, really important. Physical activity and exercise is typically clinically as exercise prescription, and it's exactly that. It's just as important as engaging with any medication that you might be on for any other health conditions, managing your diet appropriately, and managing your emotional health and well-being. It's about taking little steps forward and setting goals as you go through this process. It might be that your overall goal might be to return to what you were doing pre-COVID. That might have been a 5K, a 10K run for some people. But to go from one step straight to a 5K, you're going to hit barriers and obstructions along the way. So that's what this physical activity program is looking to introduce, a gradual increase in your physical capacity, allowing that progression to that overall goal. I think that gives us our service in a bit of a snapshot. By all means, if you are new and didn't have awareness of long COVID services across Hertfordshire, and you think you might be suffering with symptoms like fatigue, breathlessness, muscular decline, and sort of social withdrawal, by all means touch base with your general practitioner. It might be a phone call in the first instance. We understand that GP practices can be quite difficult to access at times, but if you present with these symptoms, you should be reviewed by at least your practice nurse and your general practitioner. And as I said, that diagnosis of long COVID comes following some exclusion investigation prior to us seeing you. So we're welcome to hopefully help support you further in the programme, and I'm sure Will can provide you with our services contact information if you need any further support. Thanks everyone, hope you enjoy the rest of the talk. Brilliant. Thanks for the introduction.
Brilliant. Okay, so that's given us a bit of a rundown of both the pathways across the county. Now, I will say now I'm very aware it's 28 minutes past 3 and we've still got one section of the agenda to get through. We'll try and get through it as quickly as we can. If you do need to leave, then we'll be sending the recording out. But if you can stay, please do, and we'll address the questions that have been unanswered once we get through it. So our last section, I'll move on slides, is from us at the Heart Sports and Physical Activity Partnership. So we are running a project around the long COVID and physical activity rehabilitation. It's what we're here doing today in terms of improving awareness, and it's being delivered primarily by my colleague Sarah Keane, who's the long COVID and physical activity project assistant, who's going to be joining me on this presentation. But I think I'm doing the first slide to give you a bit of a fundamental. So it's a 1-year feasibility project, and it's been funded by Public Health within Hertfordshire County Council. It's very much delivered in collaboration with the Hertfordshire's 2 NHS COVID rehabilitation services that we've just heard from there. That's really important for us. We're not COVID specialists, we're not medical practitioners, but we will engage with people once we have the sort of clinical okay from those that are more in the know, and Sarah's going to talk about that a bit more in a minute. The project's aiming to explore how physical activity can benefit an individual's ability to recover from long COVID. We have some good knowledge already, but this is still kind of relatively new to the world, so we're trying to develop that knowledge a bit further so it can aid further learning and further use of physical activity for benefiting physical activity symptoms. So we'll be doing this by initially introducing a pathway from those services to ongoing community physical activity. To do that, we're going to be mapping and assessing a whole range of suitable physical activity opportunities across the county. We're offering training to physical activity deliverers where there's an upskill and awareness of long COVID where that's needed. We'll be developing new physical activity opportunities or further developing existing physical activity opportunities where there's gaps in provision. And ultimately trying to improve knowledge and awareness of long COVID and physical activity through training, webinars and wider resources, again, such as the webinar that we're doing today. And throughout all of this, we're working with the Hertfordshire Public Health Evidence and Intelligence team to develop a comprehensive evaluation framework to encourage the really valuable learning that should be elicited from this project. So to go into those points in a little bit more detail, Sarah's going to talk us through our pathway.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name's Sarah. As Will mentioned, I'm the project assistant for this long COVID project. Probably the one from spamming you with all the emails, so sorry about that. But yeah, thank you so much for such a great attendance today. It's really good to see how high the numbers are. I'm just going to give a bit of a rundown on the sort of referral pathway that we envision for this project. As you can see, it sort of starts with the GP, so I'll start from the top. So initially, a patient will go to their GP, where the doctor can then either confirm whether they may have had COVID or confirm that they have got long COVID. So they do a couple of tests, so including blood tests and x-rays, and that's essentially just to have some differential diagnosis. So just make sure that there's nothing else that's causing those symptoms to present, whether that be like an underlying acute infection or sort of a long-term health condition they're not already aware of. So the GP will then refer that patient to the COVID rehab service. So fill out a referral form, which is screened, the patient will be triaged and then referred to the appropriate service based on the symptoms they're displaying. So as Harsha and David have already said, there's lots of different services that are on offer, so that's really good. And obviously the patient will spend a certain amount of time in that service, which will differ for everyone. But once that patient has been there for a certain period of time and the clinician is like happy that, you know, they're no longer needed in the service, they can then be discharged when appropriate. At that point, they'll then be referred on to me. So I'm going to be the physical activity coordinator at Heart Sports Partnership for this project. So initially I'll have sort of like a telephone-based physical activity triage with the patient where we can discuss what they're looking to do, what activities they like, what they don't like, any sort of key details that might sort of help me get an understanding of what they're really looking to do. And at that point, I can then sort of signpost based on the mapping that we've already done that Will just discussed, to try and really marry up what they're looking to do with what we sort of found in Hertfordshire that's running at the moment. But before we actually sort of send them on their way to the activity, I'll just make sure that I reach out to the physical activity deliverer just to make sure they're aware of the first attendance and have had the opportunity to have access to the long COVID training, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail soon, just so they're fully equipped for when someone with long COVID is going to turn up to their session. So once the patient actually goes to the community physical activity provision, I'll make sure to be having regular contact with them just to make sure that they're happy with what they're doing. There's no relapse in symptoms, just see how they're getting on generally. And if any amendment then needs to be taken place with the activity or the approach, then that can be actioned as needed. But essentially, we're hoping to get to a point where the patient is eventually confident and content with the activity they're sort of going to. They're content with their long COVID symptoms, hopefully there's no relapse and they're either being maintained or increased. Increased as in getting better, not increased symptoms. And then essentially at that point, there won't be any sort of support needed from us. So we can then end that contact with myself and that patient. But what's quite nice to see from this model is that there's always that constant sort of communication between both the health sector, myself and Heart Sports Partnership, and the patient and the physical activity provision. So there's always that continued support network and communication. So people are never left in the dark or stuck with concerns or queries and things like that. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. You can move on to the next slide, Will.
Brilliant. So our physical activity mapping, we've mentioned we're currently mapping a whole range of suitable activity opportunities to include within the pathway that Sarah's just detailed. And that could be anything that's suitable. So it could come from real structured exercise referral programs running through our leisure providers, through to walking groups, seated exercise, yoga, but also we're trying to include non-traditional physical activities. So it could be gardening groups, it could be singing, it could be things that encourage more mindfulness without the traditional physical activity. Any activity is physical activity. At the end of the day, if you're traveling to it, you're being active. So we're trying to work with the patient to identify what their motivation will be to be more active or to get out of the house and be social and achieve all those outcomes we've been talking about throughout the webinar. So the activities must be low impact. They must be adapted, be able to be adapted to suit the patient's abilities and requirements. They must be suitably accessible and they need to be led by appropriately qualified delivery staff. The mapping is very much an ongoing activity, so it's not that it will be finished sort of on the point of first referral and that's what we'll use. We'll be developing new opportunities, we'll be discovering new opportunities, and we'll also be working out what works better and what perhaps doesn't work so well. So it'll be a constantly evolving process, and identifying those areas for expansion, whether that be developing offers. So if there's anyone in the room still or watching this back that has yet to be contacted by Sarah but would like their activities to be included within that mapping and therefore within the pathway, please do reach out to her at the email address that's on the screen, and she can have a conversation. Sarah.
Sorry, my internet's a bit bit slow today. So I'm just going to talk a little bit around the funded long COVID training that I briefly mentioned back a couple of slides ago. So within this project, we have got a bit of funding set aside for long COVID training, essentially just to provide physical activity providers the opportunity to upskill and make their sessions more inclusive of people living with long COVID. So after doing a little bit of rummaging around on the internet and seeing what sort of courses are out there at the moment, we decided to go with a company called Future Fit, who offer a COVID-19 rehab course. And essentially during this course, you can learn how to support clients who've suffered from COVID-19 and also build your own awareness of the condition and sort of the best way you can use strategies to help aid their recovery and rehabilitation. So there's 5 main modules within the course. So you look at what COVID is, understanding it, how you can apply your sessions to help people with COVID, a specific module on long COVID, and also touches on breathing biomechanics. And each session sort of module is around 45 minutes to an hour, so they're really not that long. And it's quite flexible, and essentially you have to sit and do all in one go. You can sort of dip in and out when if needed around work and other commitments. So that's definitely a pro that I found from when I actually did the module myself. The course is actually recognised by CIMSPA, so you can actually get 3 CPD points from doing this. And it is fully funded, as I mentioned, so it's completely free to access as long as you meet the eligibility criteria. So it's only two things really that you need to meet this criteria. You have to be a physical activity provider, and you have to be delivering your sessions within Hertfordshire. So the 2 main things just to make sure that you can access that. But if you are, you're more than welcome to access this training. And how you can access the training. So as we'll mention at the start, there'll be sort of a pop-up survey at the end of this webinar. And one of the questions on there is just to register your interest, basically. So you just pop your name and email on there, and then we can reach out. Or you can visit our webpage, which I put the link at the bottom of the screen. And again, that will just bring you to sort of a link where you can sign up for your interest, and then we can just email you with further instruction from there on. Next slide, Bill.
We'll be to touch on, we'll be sending a follow-up email for everyone that's registered for this event, and we'll include further details and links in there as well. And I think it's probably important to point out that we're not intending or claiming to create experts in COVID or long COVID through this. This is all about enabling people to have that first conversation, to be able to adapt their session of what they're already doing, and we're hoping it'll be as applicable to someone who's kind of qualified up to their eyeballs, to equally someone that's running a one-off yoga session in the village hall, but would like to be able to be as inclusive as possible for someone that's eliciting symptoms of long COVID that turns up to their session. I'll fly through this. What we're looking to achieve from the project, we're obviously looking for improved uptake for physical activity for people living with long COVID. We're looking for improved knowledge of the benefits of physical activity for long COVID. So not only how, but what physical activities can best help. We're trying to create a more inclusive physical activity sector. So hopefully the ripple effect of that outside of the direct pathway is that the sector becomes more inclusive in its nature, and therefore kind of similar symptoms that are being shown by people not living with long COVID will also be more inclusive to those people as well. We're building stronger connectivity between the health and physical activity sectors. The event that we're running today has been a fantastic example of how the 2 sectors can come together really nicely, I think, to around a common purpose. We're looking to improve knowledge of physical activity opportunities generally across the piece, so what's available, but also where are the gaps, and then wider than that, improving the long COVID awareness, so trying to help people understand what long COVID is, what it means to have long COVID, and what the local support systems look like, again, hence our webinar today. And then finally, Sarah, to finish off, I think.
Yeah. No problem. So I'm just going to sort of talk around next steps that we're looking to do for progression of this project. So we're actually looking to launch our pathway in June this year, so literally in about a week, I think that is. So not long at all to wait. And the long COVID training I discussed will actually be available to physical activity providers next week. So please do, if you're interested, do register your interest so we can sort of get that rolled out as soon as possible. Also, scoping for new physical activity is currently taking place, so that's really exciting as well. Regarding the evaluation framework for the project, that's currently being finalised through Public Health Evaluation Intelligence team, so that should be also ready to go ASAP, which again is really exciting for us to really get started. And given this project is a sort of pilot feasibility project, there is going to be that element of ongoing learning and the constant discovering new things and new evidence coming out, so that's also exciting. And again, there will be probably amendments. So we've got our sort of pathway and stuff now and things laid out, but things could probably change depending on how things pan out. So again, that's really exciting stuff. And if any of you guys want to sort of read out more information, I'll just pop the web link at the bottom of the slide, and feel free to just pop me an email as well. If I can help best I can, I will do that. I think luckily for you guys, that's the end from running
Brilliant.
over a bit.
I'm gonna pop a really quick apology. I've written this slide, and it should be public health, evidence and intelligence team. So that's hands up, my fault. But we'll skip on from that and cover up my mistake. So that brings us to the end of our presentations today. We've still got so many people with us, so thank you very much for sticking with us. I'm going to address some of the questions that are still in the Q&A. So if I could invite our other panelists back, if you're still with us, and I'll bring these up and see if there's anything still in the Q&A that we haven't been able to address. So around the Nuffield Health Programme, someone's asked if it's in addition to physical rehab service and the long COVID service. So I can answer that one, and yes, it absolutely is. So I know Philip, that was in our video earlier, was going through the service and was being seen by Abby, and then Abby sort of signposted him onwards outside of her service to the opportunity kind of extra. So it's kind of an early iteration of that pathway that we're looking to create with HSP. So it's very much in addition. Interestingly, when we heard from the West Herts pathway, they're building in an internal capacity as well. So there are different models and different approaches, but that's what we're looking to do there. So what else have we got here still? I think most things have been probably covered. So Leanne's asked, how much is the course? Appreciate it's free to providers, but how much does it cost you? That's something I'll have to look into, but I will get back to you, Leanne, privately. I think you'll be able to look up online. So it's delivered by FutureFit. If you Google that, you'll be able to see the cost. I would stress, please don't go and do that directly. If you can come into our program, then obviously we can save you some money by completing that course through us. We've got a question. Have the majority of long COVID patients had any vaccines, or is this mainly for those who have not had vaccines? That's probably a question for either Harsha or Abby, if I could open that up to you.
So I have to be honest, we weren't really asking that at the beginning because it wasn't mandated at that time. But when we have started asking now, lots of them have been vaccinated, yeah. So, but a lot of, I would say the ones that we had worse were the ones who got it in the first wave and the second wave, where there were no vaccines available, and that's definitely been more severe. And I think there is some emerging evidence that vaccines do protect against, not against long COVID, but it's not as severe.
Brilliant, thank you. And then the last comment from Andrew, I'm not sure if Andrew's still with us, but he wants to pick up on a couple of comments. We have an integrated long COVID patients. So we've integrated long COVID patients into our exercise on referral scheme in Leicestershire. Several of our wider workforce have also completed the CORES rebuild programme. Screening takes place within secondary care, PR and CR departments. So not so much a question, but I think that obviously was a little while ago, and that's a really nice indictment of where we're taking our pathway as well. And absolutely our exercise referral programs and schemes to our leisure providers are going to play a really big part in the pathway that we're building, because it gives that one-to-one nature, it gives that second screening from someone in the professional know-how, and it gives that sort of one-to-one support, which we've already learned is really, really important, but also the ability to then move into group settings to whatever exercise opportunities and programs are being offered within that leisure provider. So yeah, watch this space for that, but we're absolutely mapping all of those and we're trying to help people get involved. So a couple of points in the chat. Lots of thanks for coming. Thank you everyone. One question from Dawn: why are patients with cardiac conditions not able to join the Hertford programme? I'm going to have to, unfortunately, Laura's not with us, so I'll need to follow that up with her, but we'll get back to you, Dawn, on that one. Sorry that we can't answer that live. And I think that brings us to the end of all the questions. So, I mean, we've still got so many people with us. I'm really thankful. I know we've gone a little bit over our allotted time, but I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Especially, I want to thank Dr. Harsha Master and Abby Minter. Laura, who's no longer with us in the webinar because she's had to go on and deliver a class, and also those that were involved in recording the videos. We will be recording this session, so it will be on our website following this. Everyone will have an email, and please as you do leave the webinar, you'll get a pop-up survey. Please do take time. It should only take a few minutes to fill that in, because that will help us not only have the insight to deliver this program, but also be guided by what you guys want to see in future events to be able to shape them to suit the sector needs. So I think that's it. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to all presenters. And if you have any questions, please do reach out, and we'll speak to you soon.